Race me, old man. I'll take your pride and your daughter. But if in your wildest dream you manage to win, you can have my bike, my money, hell, take my whole life's fortune." The crowd went silent. Cameras caught every sneer, every twitch of arrogance on the governor's son's face. He wasn't racing for sport, he was racing for domination. Across from him, Ray Johnson adjusted his helmet, his hands steady, his eyes unreadable. His old Yamaha looked like a joke beside that $1 million Ducati, but the stillness in his stance made even the wind hesitate. Reporters whispered. The daughter's tears glimmered in the heat. The world was watching a man's dignity being gambled like a poker chip. Then Ray's voice cut through the chaos, low and calm. "Be careful, boy. Pride burns faster than gasoline." Engines ignited. The world held its breath. "Hey there, my friend. Before we hit the road with this story, take a breath. Relax. You've made it here for a reason, maybe to escape the noise of the day, maybe to remember that good hearts still win in the end. Around here, we don't just tell stories, we live them. Stories that remind us that kindness, respect, and humility still matter in a world that often forgets. So grab a coffee, settle in, and let me take you on a ride you won't forget. And if you believe that real strength lives in quiet souls and honest hearts, hit that subscribe button now, because this channel is where good people still finish first. Now, let's begin. The morning sun hung low over the small town, spilling golden light through the dusty windows of a modest garage at the edge of Main Street. Inside, the rhythmic sound of a wrench turning echoed like an old song only two people knew the words to. Ray Johnson stood bent over a carburetor, his rough hands moving with the patience of a man who'd spent a lifetime fixing more than just machines. Every movement was deliberate, quiet, and steady, as though time itself slowed down in that little shop. The faint scent of motor oil and old leather filled the air, the smell of work, of history, of peace. The garage told its own story. On the walls hung faded photographs, grainy snapshots of a younger Ray, his hair dark and wild, caught mid-turn on a racing bike that seemed to fly rather than roll. Headlines from old newspapers curled at the corners, celebrating victories long forgotten by the world but not by the man who had earned them. In one photo, he stood with a trophy in his hand, a crowd behind him, the glint of triumph in his eyes. Now those same eyes were softer, weathered by years of storms and sun, but still sharp, the eyes of a man who had seen everything and learned what truly matters. Behind him, the small bell above the door jingled. Lena stepped inside, carrying a box of parts almost as big as she was. Her dark hair was tied back, a streak of grease on her cheek. She set the box down with a thud and brushed her hands against her jeans, smiling in that quiet way that said she'd been raised among tools and engines rather than mirrors and makeup. "Morning, Daddy," she said. "Morning, sweetheart," Ray answered without looking up, the same answer he'd given every morning for years. She walked over to his workbench, scanning the wall of hanging tools, everything neatly placed, each wrench and screwdriver exactly where it belonged. "You were here before sunrise again." Ray chuckled softly. "Old habits don't sleep much. Besides, he nodded toward the half-assembled motorcycle, was making a noise I didn't like last night. Couldn't rest until I figured out what she was trying to tell me." Lena shook her head. "You talk about these machines like they're people." "They are," he said, tightening a bolt. "Every bike has a soul. And like people, you've got to listen before you fix what's wrong." For a moment, only the hum of the radio filled the space, an old country tune whispering from a speaker buried under dust. The air felt thick with nostalgia. Lena wandered toward the wall of photos, tracing her fingers over the images. "You never told me what it felt like," she said softly. "Racing like that. Everyone says you were unbeatable." Ray paused, lifting his gaze to her. "It felt like flying," he admitted. "Like you could outrun every mistake you ever made. But when the cheering stopped and the engines went quiet, you'd still have to face yourself." He wiped his hands on a rag and looked out the window, where the highway shimmered in the distance. "Fame fades faster than fuel. Respect, That's what keeps a man standing. Respect keeps you alive, Lena echoed with a small smile, repeating the words he'd said to her since she was a child. He smiled back, proud. That's right. Engines can roar, crowds can scream, but it's respect that makes the road remember you. They worked in companionable silence after that, passing tools back and forth without needing to speak. The connection between them was built not on words but on rhythm, the same kind of rhythm that turns work into peace. Outside, the town began to wake. The hum of passing trucks and the bark of a dog carried faintly through the open door, but inside the garage, time felt slower, softer. Ray's life had once been fast, too fast, a blur of asphalt, competition and adrenaline. Now, it moved at the steady pace of his wrench. And yet sometimes, when the light hit just right or the wind carried the distant growl of a motorcycle engine, that old spark flickered behind his calm exterior. It wasn't pride. It was memory, the kind of memory that never truly fades, only sleeps. Lena caught him staring out the window again. You miss it sometimes, don't you? He hesitated. Racing. He gave a small shrug. I miss the road. Not the noise, not the fame. Just the feeling of the wind trying to tell you something you're too young to understand. He looked at her, his expression softening. But I've got everything I need right here. She smiled, though a trace of worry crossed her face. She had seen how people in town sometimes looked at her father, as if he were just an old mechanic who had let the world pass him by. They didn't know the stories hidden in the grease on his hands or the quiet strength in his voice. The sound of an approaching motorcycle cut through their calm, distant but growing louder. Lena tilted her head. Someone's coming in fast. Ray listened for a moment, the faint growl of the engine approaching, then nodded. Yeah, he said quietly. Young engine. Still trying to prove something. He turned back to his work. Let's hope whoever it is remembers to brake before they learn the hard way. The motorcycle passed by without stopping, its echo fading down the road. Ray picked up a wrench again, as though nothing had interrupted the stillness. Lena leaned against the workbench, watching him. You ever think you'll race again? Ray didn't answer immediately. He tightened one more bolt, tested the engine, and finally said, no. Life's not about how fast you go. It's about how far you make it after everyone else has stopped. He reached for the radio, turning the volume up just a little, filling the space with an old tune that seemed older than the town itself. Outside, sunlight danced across the hood of a rusty pickup, and the smell of fresh oil mixed with the air of a new day. Inside that small garage, the world was still. The man once called a legend had found peace in simplicity, a peace he guarded quietly, never boasting, never reaching for the glory that used to chase him. Ray Johnson had traded fame for something far greater. Respect. And that, to him, was worth everything. The evening glow draped the governor's estate in shades of gold and wealth, every corner of the sprawling mansion shimmering beneath chandeliers that looked too heavy for their ceilings. Expensive laughter floated across the courtyard, where the air smelled of perfume and power. It was the kind of night designed to show the world who mattered and who didn't. In the middle of it all stood Ethan Blake, the governor's son, the golden heir of privilege. He wore confidence like armor, polished and sharp, his tailored suit hugging a frame that had never known a day of real work. The cameras loved him, the crowd adored him. Every handshake was a performance, every smile a mirror of his father's influence. Ethan's voice carried easily, smooth and loud, soaked with the kind of arrogance that comes from never hearing the word no. His friends surrounded him like satellites orbiting a sun they hoped would keep shining on them. The laughter around him was practiced, polite, the kind that only follows money. Behind the velvet ropes, sleek motorcycles gleamed in perfect rows, trophies of power more than passion. Engines purred occasionally, as though restless, waiting for someone to prove a point. Across the courtyard, away from the noise and the politics, Lena moved quietly through the crowd. She didn't belong to that world of designer smiles and polished cruelty, and she didn't try to. She was there helping with the charity auction, the governor's annual show of generosity that raised more ego than money. Her simple dress and calm presence stood out against the sequins and silk, but not in the way the guests noticed. It was Ethan who noticed. He saw her from across the marble floor, the daughter of the mechanic who worked on the town's engines, the same man he'd once mocked for driving a relic from another century. She was different, and that difference caught him off guard. Maybe it was her poise, maybe it was that she didn't look at him with the awe he'd grown used to. Either way, curiosity turned quickly into interest, and interest into a kind of challenge. He walked toward her, cutting through clusters of people who made room for him without being asked. "You're Ray Johnson's daughter, right?" he said, his tone carrying both charm and ownership. Lena nodded politely. "That's right. Can I help you with something, Mr. Blake?" He smiled, a smile practiced in mirrors. "You can start by dropping the Mr. Blake. Call me Ethan." She didn't. "I'm busy, Ethan. There's a lot to get ready before the auction begins." Ethan leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You work too hard for someone who could have an easier life. I've got a place at my table tonight. Why don't you sit with me? You'll enjoy yourself." There was a pause, not of hesitation, but of disbelief. Lena set down the clipboard she was holding and looked at him, her expression calm but unamused. "I appreciate the offer," she said evenly, "but I'm not interested." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. It wasn't the answer he was expecting. "You're not interested?" he repeated, his voice rising slightly, as though she'd missed the part where he was doing her a favor. She smiled faintly, not unkindly. "No, I'm not." Then she turned away, leaving him standing alone amid the laughter of people who had seen the exchange. For a few seconds, the world seemed to still around him. The rejection landed harder than he expected, not because he cared about her answer, but because of who she was. A mechanic's daughter. Someone from a world that should have known better than to say no to him. Behind him, one of his friends snorted, failing to hide his amusement. "Guess she doesn't know who she's talking to," he said. Another laughed, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. "You, rejected by a grease monkey's kid? That's one for the headlines." Ethan forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. The laughter dug beneath his skin, sharp as a blade. "She'll change her mind," he said coolly, but his tone lacked conviction. "Sure," another friend teased, "after she finishes washing oil off her hands." Their laughter followed him as he walked away, hands shoved in his pockets, jaw tight. The charm he wore like a second skin began to crack. The rejection wasn't just personal, it was public. It stung not because he wanted her, but because she'd stripped away his illusion of control in front of everyone who mattered in his shallow circle. He found himself outside on the terrace, the evening air heavy with humidity and the low hum of engines idling in the distance. From where he stood, he could see the gleam of headlights along the distant road, the same road that led past the small garage he'd mocked so many times. Somewhere out there was Ray Johnson, the man his father called that relic in grease-stained clothes. Ethan's reflection stared back at him in the glass doors. The perfect suit, the perfect smile, the perfect sun. And yet, in that moment, none of it felt perfect. He could still hear his friends laughing behind him, could still feel the burn of humiliation in his chest. A voice from behind him broke his thoughts. "She really got under your skin, huh?" It was Marcus, one of his oldest friends, the kind who thrived on chaos. "You gonna let that slide?" Ethan didn't answer at first. He just stared at the road beyond the gates. Then, slowly, a smirk returned to his face, colder this time, calculated. "No," he said. "I don't think I will." Marcus grinned. "What are you thinking?" Ethan turned to face him, the fire of pride burning behind his eyes. "I'm thinking it's time someone reminded her, and her father, how small they really are." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You mean the old biker? Come on, he's harmless." Ethan's smirk widened. "Then it shouldn't be hard to prove, should it?" He looked toward the row of motorcycles lined up under the lights, chrome and power gleaming under the night sky. The soft rev of an engine echoed from somewhere down the hill, carried on the summer breeze. To anyone else, it was just another sound in the distance. But to Ethan, it was a challenge waiting to be written, and he had just found the perfect way to erase his humiliation. He glanced once more toward the crowd inside, where laughter and music continued without him. His eyes found Lena for a fleeting moment, the girl who had said no. His jaw tightened. The idea formed fully now, sharp and unshakable. This wasn't over. He'd make sure of it. As he turned back toward his friends, his voice was calm again, his mask of charm perfectly restored. "You'll see," he said quietly. "By the time I'm done, they'll remember my name, and she'll wish she hadn't said no." No one in that glittering courtyard could have guessed that a single rejection, a single bruise to one man's ego, would soon set in motion a chain of events that the entire town, and the world beyond it, would never forget. The next afternoon, the town's quiet streets buzzed with a tension that felt almost unreal. Word had spread fast, too fast. What had begun as wounded pride inside a mansion had turned into something larger, louder, and crueler. Ethan Blake wasn't content to nurse his humiliation in private. He wanted to make a spectacle of his revenge. He wanted to turn the town's eyes toward the man he decided to destroy. Reporters began to arrive before the ink dried on his announcement. Cameramen unloaded tripods, cords, and microphones onto the cracked pavement outside Ray Johnson's modest garage. The sunlight bounced off the polished surface of Ethan's Ducati, parked deliberately in front like a red flag of arrogance. His friends lounged near it, laughing, their sunglasses reflecting the growing crowd. The governor's son was all smiles, feeding on attention, his voice echoing through the microphone someone had eagerly handed him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, spreading his arms wide like a performer stepping into the spotlight, "today we make history. A race between old and new. Between what's fading and what's unstoppable. My Ducati against that relic in there." He jerked his head toward the garage door, where Ray's shadow moved inside, ignoring the commotion. "Let's show the world what progress looks like when it leaves the past behind." A ripple of laughter followed. Ethan basked in it, pausing for effect before turning to the camera crews. "And to make this fair, let's raise the stakes, shall we? I'm putting everything on the line, my bike, my fortune, my pride." He smirked, letting the weight of his words hang in the air before twisting them into something sharper. "And if I win, Ray Johnson's daughter will accompany me to my next gala, as my guest." Gasps tore through the crowd. Some of the reporters froze, even his friends shifted uneasily. The challenge wasn't just about speed anymore. It was personal, cruel, meant to sting deeper than defeat. From the edge of the crowd came a voice, firm and angry. "You're disgusting." Lena's words cracked through the noise like lightning. She stood near the reporters, her fists clenched, eyes burning with fury. For a heartbeat, the world went still. Cameras turned toward her, microphones tilted forward, catching every breath. Ethan's grin didn't falter. "Just a bit of motivation," he said lightly. "After all, every race needs a prize." Lena stepped forward, but her father's hand gently caught her wrist. Ray Johnson had finally emerged from the garage, wiping his hands on a rag, his movements calm, deliberate. He looked from Ethan to the sea of cameras, his weathered face unreadable. The crowd waited. Ethan lifted his chin, expecting rage, a protest, maybe even fear. Instead, Ray's voice came low and steady, carrying more weight than any microphone could amplify. "Then let's ride, boy," he said. "But you might not like what you learn." The tone wasn't defiant, it was final. A quiet promise. And that unnerved Ethan more than anger ever could have. The murmurs spread. Reporters repeated the words to their microphones, voices rising with excitement. The challenge had gone from rumor to national spectacle within minutes. TV trucks parked along the road, setting up satellite dishes. Drones buzzed overhead, capturing the scene from every angle. The sun dipped lower, and the air thickened with the kind of energy that precedes a storm. Ray turned away without another word, disappearing back into the garage to prepare, while Lena stood watching him, her heart caught between fear and pride. Ethan, still smiling for the cameras, called after him. "Hope you're ready, old man. I wouldn't want you to embarrass yourself on live television." There was no reply, only the sound of metal clinking softly from inside the garage, the rhythm of a man who had already decided his answer hours ago. As the crews tested their equipment and the first live broadcasts began, the town transformed into an arena. Reporters described the event as a clash of eras, a battle of pride, and a race the nation didn't know it needed. Viewers across the country tuned in, drawn to the absurdity of it, a governor's son and a quiet mechanic facing each other under a burning sky. But those who knew Ray Johnson, those who had seen the steady strength in his hands and the calm in his eyes, didn't see a man cornered. They saw a storm gathering in silence. The last thing heard before the broadcast cut to commercial was Ethan's confident laugh, echoing across the crowd. And beneath that arrogance, hidden from the cameras and noise, stood a simple truth waiting to reveal itself, that no amount of money, power, or cruelty could outshine the kind of respect that never needed to be announced. If you believe no one should use power to humiliate others, hit subscribe, because here, we stand with respect, not arrogance. By sunrise, the quiet town had transformed into something unrecognizable. The small road leading out toward the desert flats was lined with vans, cameras, and banners. Reporters moved through the growing crowd like restless birds, setting up microphones, checking sound equipment, and calling out over the noise of engines warming in the distance. The air smelled of exhaust and coffee, of heat beginning to rise off the asphalt. This wasn't just a race anymore, it was an event, a spectacle, a public stage for pride and vengeance to meet. Ethan Blake arrived first, of course. The convoy of black cars announced him before anyone saw his face. He stepped out into the sunlight wearing his arrogance like a perfectly tailored suit. His Ducati glimmered beside him, red and flawless, a symbol of everything he believed separated him from men like Ray Johnson. The cameras followed his every movement, lenses catching the gleam of polished metal and the smooth grin that came so easily to a man who had never been told he wasn't special. He adjusted his sunglasses and turned toward the reporters. "You're looking at the future of racing," he said, his voice loud enough to carry across the lot. 900 horsepower of precision. Built for victory. No second chances, no second place. His words drew scattered applause from his circle of admirers. A few journalists chuckled politely, though even they sensed the arrogance burning through every syllable. Someone asked him about his opponent, and Ethan smirked. "Old Ray? He'll show up. He always does. Men like him can't resist proving they still matter." He leaned closer to one of the cameras, lowering his tone to something almost theatrical. "But let's be honest, today's race isn't about bikes. It's about evolution. The strong move forward. The rest fade into stories people forget." Behind the crowd, the low growl of an engine cut through the noise. Heads turned. Ray Johnson's truck pulled up slowly, the old Yamaha strapped to the flatbed. The contrast was striking. No convoy, no spectacle, just a single pickup coated in dust and history. Ray stepped out quietly, greeting a few familiar faces with nods. There was no entourage, no flashing grin for the cameras. Only calm. He unstrapped the motorcycle himself, the faded blue paint catching faint light under a thin film of grime. Some in the crowd laughed softly, the kind of laughter reserved for what people assume they already understand. To them, the bike looked like a relic, something that belonged in a museum or a junkyard. But Ray touched it like it was alive, like it breathed the same air he did. He knelt beside it, tightening a bolt, wiping the dust from the handlebars, checking the pressure in the tires with slow, practiced precision. His hands moved with a familiarity born of decades, spent listening to machines instead of men. Lena stood a few paces away, arms crossed, worry etched into her face. But Ray's calm seemed to anchor her, It had always been that way. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions at him. "Mr. Johnson, how does it feel to face the governor's son? Do you really think that old bike can keep up?" Ray didn't answer. He didn't need to. Instead, he turned a small screw near the engine and gave the throttle a light twist. The Yamaha came alive, the sound deep and steady, not loud, not flashy, but confident. It was a sound that made a few people turn their heads in surprise. A few engineers among the crew looked closer, sensing something they couldn't quite name. Under that rusted frame, one whispered, "Something's different." It was. While Ethan smiled for cameras and boasted about horsepower and technology, Ray's Yamaha sat quietly, carrying secrets forged from a lifetime of passion and loss. It wasn't built to impress. It was built to endure. As he worked, a memory began to unfold in the back of his mind, soft, like the warmth of an old photograph. He remembered the first time he let Lena sit on a motorcycle, her small hands gripping the handlebars as the sun dipped below the hills. "Machines don't care who you are," he had told her. "They only care how you treat them. Respect them, and they'll carry you farther than pride ever could." She'd looked up at him then, eyes wide with the kind of wonder only children have, and he'd known she understood. Another memory followed, darker. The night he lost one of his closest friends on the track. They'd been young, reckless, drunk on speed and adrenaline. A mistake in a curve, a flash of sparks, and then the unbearable stillness that followed. He could still hear the silence that came after the crash, the sound of the world holding its breath. That was the day he walked away from racing for good. The trophies had gathered dust after that, the photos faded, but the lessons never did. He remembered standing over that same Yamaha years later, rebuilding it piece by piece, not to race again, but to honor what was gone. Every modification, every line of wiring and tuning, carried meaning. It was a machine made of memory, sweat, and respect, something only he truly understood. Back in the present, Ray finished his checks and stood up. Ethan was still posing for interviews, holding up his helmet for the cameras. "Winning today," he said into a microphone, "isn't just about me. It's about reminding everyone that the old world doesn't stand a chance against progress. This is what the future looks like." Ray watched him for a long moment, then turned to Lena. "Some people mistake noise for strength," he said softly. "The louder they are, the less they listen." Lena's voice trembled. "You don't have to do this, Dad." He smiled, gentle and patient. "Sometimes you don't race to win, sweetheart. You race to remind people what's worth respecting." She didn't answer, just looked at him with the same eyes that used to watch him ride away down the old country roads. He gave her a small nod before turning back to his bike. As the crowd thickened and the cameras rolled, the line between spectacle and meaning blurred. Reporters announced the race with words like historic and unbelievable. The world was watching, though it didn't yet understand what it was about to see. Ray brushed his hand across the Yamaha's tank one last time. Beneath the chipped paint and rusted edges, the heart of the machine beat differently. What lay under that old frame wasn't just metal and fuel. It was a miracle only one man understood. He whispered something under his breath, words lost in the rumble of engines and chatter. Then he stepped back, folded his arms, and waited for the noise to die down. He had spent a lifetime learning that patience always outlasts arrogance. And soon, everyone else would learn it too. The crowd had grown restless under the heat, murmurs rising like waves as the reporters jostled for position. Satellite trucks hummed, cameras adjusted focus, and every major network in the state had gone live. The banner behind Ethan's podium read the race of pride. What had started as a petty challenge was now a televised event, one man's arrogance broadcast to the world. Ethan stepped forward, his grin perfectly measured, his confidence swelling with the size of his audience. He thrived under the spotlight. Every flicker of the cameras made his voice louder, smoother, dripping with false charm. He pointed toward Ray's Yamaha with theatrical disgust. "Let's make this interesting," he said. If you lose, old man, I take your pride, and your daughter. She'll stand beside me at my next gala as a reminder of what happens when you challenge your betters." The reaction was immediate. The laughter from his friends was drowned out by gasps from the crowd. A reporter dropped her microphone. Even the wind seemed to stop moving. Lena pushed through the line of onlookers, her voice breaking as she shouted, "Stop it, Ethan. You're disgusting. This isn't a game." Her words echoed through the speakers, piercing through the noise. For a moment, even the reporters fell silent. Ethan only smiled wider, relishing her anger. "Oh, come on," he said. "I'm giving him a chance to win. Fair's fair, isn't it?" He turned back to Ray, his tone mockingly generous. "If, by some miracle, you win this race, you can have it all. My Ducati, my money, my entire fortune. Everything I own. But when you lose," he leaned forward, his voice low enough that only the front row could hear, "you'll watch your world crumble on live television." Lena's eyes filled with tears. She looked to her father, begging him not to say yes. "Please, Dad," she whispered. "He's not worth it." Ray stood still, his face calm, unreadable. He glanced at Ethan, then at the cameras capturing every breath, every heartbeat. The air was so heavy with tension it felt like the whole world was holding it in. Finally, Ray nodded once. His voice, when it came, was steady and measured. "You've got yourself a bet," he said. "But remember this, money can buy noise, not respect." The crowd stirred again, half cheering, half murmuring in disbelief. Ethan grinned triumphantly, mistaking calm for surrender. Reporters rushed to relay the news. "The race of pride," they called it. Headlines flashed across screens. "Governor's son bets fortune against local mechanic in live showdown." Producers barked orders through headsets. Drone cameras lifted into the air. The story was no longer just about two men. It had become a spectacle of ego and endurance, of wealth against wisdom. Ray walked back toward his bike, his every movement deliberate, the stillness in him louder than any applause. Ethan followed his every step with the hungry eyes of a man who believed he'd already won. As the noise swelled around them, Ray turned once more toward his rival, his gaze calm and final. "Then let's see whose soul burns faster, yours or your engine." The words cut through the crowd like steel through silence. And for the first time, Ethan Blake didn't have an answer. If you'd never let arrogance win, drop a like right now. Show the world you stand with respect. Engines idled in the heavy stillness of the afternoon, the hum of anticipation thicker than the heat itself. The crowd pressed closer behind the barricades, faces tense with expectation, eyes fixed on the two riders at the starting line. Reporters whispered breathlessly into their microphones, their words already being broadcast to millions watching from living rooms and office screens across the country. It wasn't just a race anymore. It had become theater, pride against patience, arrogance against respect. Ethan sat astride his Ducati like a king preparing for coronation, the red bodywork gleaming beneath the unforgiving sun. His gloves were spotless, his boots new, his helmet polished to mirror perfection. Every movement screamed confidence. He revved the engine, sending the sound crashing through the crowd like a declaration of victory before the first meter had been run. Cameras loved him, flashes caught his grin. "Hope you've got a tow truck ready, old man," he shouted over the noise. Beside him, Ray Johnson straddled his Yamaha in silence. The bike looked tired to anyone who didn't know better. Paint faded, edges scratched, its metal dulled by years of hard miles. But when Ray twisted the throttle, the sound it made was deep and even, the steady heartbeat of something alive and sure. He adjusted his gloves, leaned forward slightly, and waited. No theatrics. No words. The flag dropped. Ethan shot forward like a cannonball, his front tire lifting slightly off the asphalt. The roar of the Ducati split the air, a sound engineered for domination. Dust and smoke spiraled behind him as he devoured the first stretch of road. The crowd erupted, cheering his name. Commentators' voices crackled through the speakers, Blake takes the lead. That Ducati's performance is unmatched. Look at that acceleration. Unbelievable. Behind him, Ray's Yamaha rolled into motion with none of the fury, but all of the control. It glided forward smoothly, its hum quiet but purposeful. He didn't chase the noise, he followed the road, each shift precise, deliberate, born of muscle memory refined over decades. For every man who rode with pride, there was another who rode with wisdom, and Ray's grip told the difference. Ethan kept glancing into his mirrors, smirking every time the distance widened. "That's it," he muttered to himself. "Stay back there where you belong." He pushed harder, accelerating into the first turn faster than most would dare. Tires screamed. The Ducati responded with obedient violence, hugging the curve like a predator in motion. Cameras tracked him with awe. Commentators praised his technique, his control, his undeniable dominance. Ray stayed steady, easing into the turns as though the road itself had slowed to his rhythm. He didn't fight it, he flowed with it. Every movement of his body told a story, of roads long traveled, of mistakes already paid for, of lessons carved into his bones. The crowd might not have seen it yet, but anyone who understood machines could feel it. The old Yamaha wasn't just keeping up. It was waiting. Halfway down the mountain stretch, Ethan felt it, a flicker in the throttle, a vibration that didn't belong. He frowned, brushing it off, twisting harder. "Not now," he muttered. "Not today." The dashboard lights blinked once, then settled. He ignored them. Pride was louder than warning. The Ducati screamed through another curve, exhaust roaring, tires leaving a faint black scar on the road. Reporters called it breathtaking. Engineers watching the broadcast called it reckless. Behind him, Ray leaned lower, his bike cutting cleanly through the dust Ethan left behind. The old Yamaha's engine tone began to shift, deepening subtly, as if it had been holding its breath until now. Under the faded tank, wires and custom parts hummed to life. A small light flickered beneath the speedometer, a sign only Ray understood. Ethan didn't notice. He was too busy pushing past what the Ducati was built for. The temperature gauge crept higher, the warning light flashing again. Sweat pooled inside his gloves. The vibration grew stronger. Still, he pushed. He wasn't racing for victory anymore. He was racing against humiliation, against the image of a mechanic's daughter watching him fail. Then it happened. A sharp sound, metallic and wrong, cracked through the air. The Ducati stuttered. The engine coughed. A plume of heat shimmered upward, invisible but deadly. Ethan's confidence fractured into panic. "Come on," he shouted, slamming the throttle, forcing the bike to obey. The response was violent, a burst of speed followed by an unmistakable grinding noise. His eyes widened. "No, no, no." Behind him, Ray's Yamaha growled. The sound had changed completely now, still steady, but louder, fuller, alive. What looked like an antique a few minutes ago now moved with the grace of something reborn. The hybrid system he and his father had built years ago engaged silently, feeding power into the engine with a precision no manufacturer could replicate. As Ray overtook him, the old man didn't look sideways. He didn't need to. The wind carried his calm forward, and Ethan could almost hear his earlier words repeating in his head, "Be careful, boy. Pride burns faster than gasoline." Ethan tried to recover, twisting the throttle again. The Ducati lurched, sputtered, the temperature light flashing red. Panic took over where pride had lived. He swerved slightly, the back tire sliding dangerously close to the guardrail. Cameras caught everything, the wobble, the terror in his eyes. Commentators' voices broke into panic. "Blake's losing control. Something's wrong with the bike." The world blurred. Ethan fought the handlebars, muscles straining. For one terrible second, he thought he'd lost it, the edge of the road flashing too close, the crowd's collective gasp ringing in his ears. Somehow, the bike steadied, limping forward, but the sound of victory was gone. Ray's Yamaha surged past, the roar rolling through the valley like a storm. The crowd, once cheering for the son of the governor, fell silent. It was the kind of silence reserved for realization, the moment people understand they've been watching the wrong man all along. Ethan's eyes followed Ray disappearing down the stretch, dust swirling in his wake. Rage and disbelief clashed inside him, then melted into something quieter, heavier, fear. He barely noticed the smoke beginning to curl from the Ducati's side panel, thin and gray at first, then thicker. He was too focused on keeping it upright, too lost in the sound of his own breath rasping inside his helmet. And then came the smell, burning oil. The cameras caught everything, the red machine slowing, the plume of smoke rising behind it, the once proud rider fighting to stay in control. Ray was already a shadow ahead, steady and certain. The crowd erupted into chaos as the finish line came into view. Drones tilted to follow the smoke trail curling behind Ethan's bike, the question hanging heavy in every broadcaster's voice. Did he crash? Was he hurt? The image froze in millions of living rooms across the country. Ethan Blake, heir to wealth and arrogance, swallowed by smoke, the Ducati faltering beneath him, while far ahead, the old Yamaha carried a legend silently toward the horizon. Comment respect wins if you believe real strength comes from humility, not arrogance. The sound that followed Ray Johnson across the finish line was not the roar of engines or the cheer of victory, but silence, deep and absolute. The Yamaha rolled to a smooth stop, its engine purring softly, the kind of calm that comes only after a storm. The air trembled with disbelief. Cameras froze mid-pan, reporters hesitated mid-sentence, and even the crowd who had come to witness humiliation stood motionless as the truth settled in. Ray lifted his helmet slowly. The sun caught the gray in his hair, and for a brief moment, he looked almost timeless. Not an old man, not a mechanic, but a force carved from patience and dignity. He exhaled, steady, controlled. His hands, calloused from years of work, rested lightly on the handlebars as if he were thanking the machine that had carried him through one last battle. 100 yards behind him, the Ducati limped over the line, coughing its final protest before shutting down completely. Smoke curled upward from its engine, gray against the harsh blue of the sky. Ethan Blake stumbled off the bike, his knees weak, his gloves trembling. His helmet hit the ground beside him with a hollow sound, rolling until it stopped at his feet. His face was pale beneath the sheen of sweat, disbelief etched into every line. He looked up, eyes scanning the crowd that had once cheered him. Now they only watched. The cameras that had captured his arrogance an hour ago now documented his undoing. Every lens felt like judgment. The reporters' microphones hovered near his face, but he couldn't form words. Pride had always come easily to him, but humility left him speechless. Ray dismounted from his Yamaha and began to walk toward him. The crowd parted quietly, unsure of what to expect. Lena broke through the line of reporters and ran to her father, tears streaking down her face. She threw her arms around him, and for the first time all day, the old man's expression softened completely. He held her close, his hand on the back of her head, his voice a quiet murmur. "It's all right, sweetheart," he whispered. "It's over." She pulled back just enough to look at him, her smile trembling. "You did it," she said. "You actually did it." Ray shook his head, a faint smile touching his lips. "No," he said. "We did. You believed when nobody else did. That's what kept me standing." The crowd began to stir, their whispers growing into something heavier than applause, respect. A few people started clapping, hesitant at first, then stronger, until the air filled with the sound of hands meeting, not for spectacle, but for recognition. The chant that had once been Ethan's name faded into something simpler. It was just Ray, repeated softly, reverently, as though they'd remembered who he was and what he stood for. Across the field, a TV announcer found his voice again, his tone reverent, almost hushed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said into his microphone, "what we've witnessed today is being called the race that humbled the governor's son. A story of arrogance brought low, and dignity rising quietly to take its place." His words rippled across the live broadcast, spreading through screens across the country. Social media filled with clips, hashtags, disbelief. People who had tuned in expecting a spectacle of ridicule now sat in silence, watching a man they'd never known teach the world what respect looked like. Ethan still stood by his broken Ducati, unable to move. His friends had disappeared into the crowd, their laughter gone, their loyalty evaporated with the smoke. The reporters turned their cameras toward Ray and Lena, but one lens lingered on Ethan, the image of pride turned hollow. Ray approached slowly, each step deliberate. When he reached Ethan, he stopped just out of arm's reach. For a long moment, neither spoke. The crowd's noise faded again until the only sound was the faint ticking of cooling engines. Ray studied him, his expression unreadable. "You okay, son?" he asked finally. Ethan looked up, startled by the word son. He nodded, though his throat worked to find a voice. "How?" he rasped. "How did you?" Ray raised a hand, cutting him off gently. "Doesn't matter how," he said. "What matters is why." He crouched beside the Ducati, running a practiced hand along its ruined frame. "Beautiful machine," he murmured. "But you pushed her past what she was made for. Machines are like people, they'll give you everything if you respect them. But if you try to own them, to dominate them, they'll break every time." Ethan's gaze dropped to the ground. He could feel the camera still on him, the judgment still lingering, but Ray's words cut through all of it. He looked at the older man with something new in his eyes, something like shame, but edged with understanding. Ray straightened and stepped closer. "You've got talent," he said quietly. "But talent without humility burns out fast." He turned then, gesturing to the Yamaha resting a few yards away. "That old bike? She's not faster because of luck. She's faster because she was built with respect. My father taught me that. I spent half a lifetime forgetting it and the other half remembering." Lena stood beside them, watching her father with pride so fierce it hurt. She saw what the cameras couldn't, not just victory, but peace. Ethan swallowed hard, his voice breaking when he finally spoke. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said. Ray met his eyes. "Yes, you did," he replied softly. "You meant every word until the road answered back." The truth of it settled like dust between them. Ethan nodded slowly, unable to argue. Behind them, the crowd had begun to chant again. This time, it wasn't a name, it was a word. Respect. Over and over, rising into the air like a prayer. Ray put a hand on his daughter's shoulder and turned to face them. He raised a single hand in acknowledgement, not in triumph. There was no need for gloating. The lesson had already been delivered. As he and Lena walked toward the edge of the field, a reporter called after him. "Mr. Johnson. Any words for the people watching tonight?" Ray paused, glancing back once. "Just this," he said. "Pride might win the crowd, but respect keeps you standing when the noise fades." The cameras caught his face just as the light shifted behind him, framing him in the gold of the setting sun. It was the kind of image that would stay with people long after the story ended. And somewhere in that silence, Ethan watched him go, realizing that the man he'd tried to humiliate had just given him something he'd never had before, a reason to be better. The crowd began to disperse, the hum of conversation soft, reverent, changed. The world had witnessed a race, but what lingered wasn't the sound of victory. It was the quiet of understanding, the moment when arrogance gives way to respect, and a man finally sees the road for what it really is, a place where pride burns out, and character keeps going. The noise began to return slowly, uncertain at first, the shuffle of the crowd, the hum of distant cameras, the murmur of reporters whispering their lines. Ethan Blake stood amid it all, surrounded by people but completely alone. His once perfect suit was streaked with oil and dust. His hair clung to his forehead, damp with sweat. The Ducati, the symbol of everything he thought made him powerful, lay silent behind him, its engine dead, its pride spent. He tried to compose himself, forcing his shoulders back, his chin up. The governor's son wasn't supposed to look broken. The cameras still pointed at him, and he could already imagine the headlines. His name trending for all the wrong reasons. He swallowed hard, searching for a remnant of the arrogance that used to come so easily. "This doesn't prove anything," he muttered, loud enough for the microphones to catch. "He just got lucky." Ray turned back to him, his movements slow, measured. The crowd parted once again, clearing a path between them. The old man's presence carried a quiet authority now, the kind that didn't need volume or wealth to be felt. He stopped in front of Ethan, close enough that the younger man couldn't look anywhere else but into his eyes. "Luck," Ray repeated softly, as though tasting the word. "You think respect is luck, son?" Ethan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His hands trembled at his sides. The camera zoomed in, capturing every flicker of his expression, the denial, the shame, the slow unraveling of the mask he had worn his whole life. Ray reached into his pocket, pulling out the same rag he'd used earlier to wipe the grease from his hands. He folded it once, twice, the fabric soft from years of use. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "You can keep your money," he said. "You'll need it to fix that machine. But remember this," he paused, his eyes steady. "You'll never buy respect. And my daughter's heart was never part of your bet." The words cut cleanly through the air, sharper than any insult could have been. For a moment, Ethan didn't move. His face faltered, the weight of the statement pressing down on him. The cameras caught it all, his trembling hands, the tremor in his throat, the slow dawning realization that the world wasn't laughing with him anymore. They were seeing him for what he was. Ray stepped back, his expression softening, not cruel, just certain. He wasn't there to humiliate him, he was there to finish the lesson. "Respect," he said quietly, almost to himself, "keeps you alive." The phrase carried through the air like a thread connecting every moment of his life, from the dusty garage to the chaos of the race, to this quiet reckoning. The crowd recognized it, the same line he'd spoken before the engines roared. And now, it meant something entirely different. A cheer began to rise, first a few claps, then a wave of applause, then voices calling his name. But it wasn't the roar of celebration, it was the sound of reverence, the acknowledgement of a man who had won something far greater than a race. Ethan's eyes flicked toward Lena, standing beside her father. She didn't look at him with anger anymore, only with pity, and that hurt more than rage ever could. He lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. Ray turned away, guiding his daughter gently toward the Yamaha. The crowd opened to let them pass. Cameras followed, flashes bursting like distant thunder, but the noise no longer mattered. Dignity had returned to the man who had never truly lost it. Behind them, Ethan stood frozen, the echo of Ray's words looping endlessly in his mind. "Respect keeps you alive." And for the first time, he understood that some lessons can't be taught by winning. They have to be learned through loss. Months passed. The headlines had faded, but the memory of the race still lingered in the corners of conversation. In cafes, in garages, in homes where people spoke quietly about the day arrogance met its match. The world moved on, but not everyone forgot. Least of all, Ethan Blake. The governor's son no longer moved through crowds with cameras following him. The wealth remained, but the gleam of it had dulled. His father's influence couldn't polish away the humiliation or the silence that followed. Every time he saw a motorcycle, every time he heard the distant hum of an engine, he remembered the moment he'd lost. Not just a race, but something larger, something invisible. One gray morning, he stood in front of Ray Johnson's small garage. The paint on the sign was chipped, the same as before. Nothing about the place had changed. But everything inside Ethan had. He hesitated before knocking, the sound of his own heartbeat loud in his ears. The door opened before he spoke. Ray stood there, wiping his hands on the same old rag. He looked neither surprised nor smug. Just calm, as always. "Morning, son," he said simply. Ethan swallowed hard. "I came to apologize," he managed. "And to learn. If you'll let me." Ray studied him for a long moment. The boy who once mocked him now stood quieter, smaller, stripped of pride but full of something far more valuable: humility. Slowly, Ray reached to his workbench and picked up a worn wrench, its handle darkened by years of use. He held it out between them. "If you want respect," he said, his voice steady and kind, "start by building something yourself." Ethan took it, the metal cold in his hand. He nodded once, words failing him but sincerity plain on his face. In that small exchange, more was said than apology could ever hold. Days later, the old Yamaha rolled down the road again, its engine steady and strong. Ray rode into the setting sun, the wind tugging at his jacket, the sky painted in fire and gold. Behind him, the sound of another engine, a newer one, uncertain but learning, followed at a respectful distance. Some races end at the finish line. Others begin there. If you'd stand with Ray, share this story. Let the world know kindness and honor still ride strong. Comment "No more arrogance" if you believe every man deserves respect.